The Whispering Woods. The axe cleaved into the oak, each arc a testament to decades of honed skill. Silas Blackwood relished the meaty impact of steel on timber, the sighing groan as the wood surrendered. Winter's frosty fingers gripped autumn's fading cloak. The air, keen-edged, carried whispers of resin and loam. The woodpile needed bolstering, a bulwark against the impending freeze. He paused, swiping at his brow with a weathered hand. The forest held its breath. Usually, a raucous chorus of squirrels bickered amongst the branches, or a jay would shriek its displeasure at his presence. Today, however, a pregnant silence loomed. Silas tilted his gaze to the canopy above. The locals called it the Whispering Woods, a place rumored to harbor forgotten tales, ancient grudges, echoes of the departed. Silas scoffed at superstition, yet held the woods in reverence. They sustained him, sheltered him, and demanded only respect in return. He raised the axe once more, his back muscles protesting with a familiar ache. His movements were spare, deliberate. Waste was a luxury he couldn't afford. Solitude in the wilderness demanded efficiency. Complacency courted death. The sun began its descent, painting the trees with long, spectral shadows that writhed like phantoms. Silas gathered the cleaved wood, building a neat stack beside the cabin's entrance. Small, built by his own labor, the cabin was solid, unpretentious, not unlike the man himself. Inside, the hearth crackled, banishing the creeping cold. The single room held only the bare necessities: a crude table, a steadfast chair, a bed heaped with pelts. Books lined one wall, their covers faded maps to other worlds. Silas prized these volumes. They were companions, escapes, portals to realms beyond the timberline. He stirred a pot of stew simmering on the fire, releasing a savory blend of venison and earth roots. A simple supper, yet nourishing. He ladled a portion into a bowl and settled at the table, a book lying open before him. Tonight, the verses were those of a long-dead poet. The quiet within the cabin was profound, less an absence of sound than a confluence of subtle noises. The aged wood's complaints, the fire's sibilant song, the distant cry of a solitary owl. It was a silence Silas had grown to accept, a silence he both treasured and, if he dared admit it, sometimes despised. He ate mechanically, his eyes drifting across the page, his thoughts elsewhere. Christmas was approaching. Another Yuletide spent alone. He conjured memories of Christmases past, a lifetime banished in the haze of time. The warmth of his mother's hearth, the tang of pine and spice, the clamor of his siblings' joy. The year his father rescued a scrawny, one-eyed mutt they christened Lucky. The furtive, whispered confidences with his sister, Martha, about their shared hopes and dreams. Those days were irrevocably gone, lost to time and hardship. His parents had succumbed to a winter's plague. Martha had fled to the city, drawn to a life beyond Silas's comprehension. Contact between them had dwindled to infrequent, awkward letters, filled with careful pleasantries and veiled loneliness. He pushed the stew away, his appetite vanished. Flickering firelight sculpted grotesque figures on the walls, shrinking the cabin, making it feel more like a prison. He rose and crossed to the window, peering into the inky expanse. The woods formed a sea of darkness, the trees like silent guardians of their ancient secrets. A sudden buffet of wind rattled the panes, and snow began to fall in earnest. The season's first flakes. Silas watched their swirling descent, a spectral dance in the night. A keen pang shot through him. Regret? Longing? He couldn't define it. He was a plain man, not prone to overthinking. He favored the concrete, the functional, splitting wood, erecting shelters, surviving. Emotions were thorny, intricate. He turned from the window, retreating to the hearth's comforting embrace. He reclaimed his book, but the words swam before his eyes. Exhaustion, deep and marrow deep, overcame him. He banked the fire, crawled beneath the fur blankets, and closed his eyes. As sleep began to claim him, he thought he detected something. A faint rustling carried on the breeze. He listened intently, but it dissipated. Just the wind, he insisted silently. Only the whispering woods, playing tricks on his senses. Yet, a nagging seed of uncertainty lingered. What if it was more than the wind? What if the woods sought to impart something? And more importantly, was he willing to heed its message? A storm's fury. Initially, the flakes were mere whispers, pirouetting on the gale like errant spirits. An hour later, a full-blown blizzard raged, a ravenous white wolf tearing at the edges of existence. The wind, a keening lament, buffeted Silas's small home, vibrating the timbers he'd meticulously shaped and placed. He stoked the fire, its flames reaching for the flue, an obstinate beacon against the encroaching gloom. Beyond the walls, the forest had dissolved, consumed by the storm's rapacious appetite. He felt a restless energy crawling beneath his skin. The solitude he normally relished now felt like a malevolent force, amplified by the tempest's violence. He recalled his sister, Sarah. He pictured her comfortable in her city flat, unaware of the wilderness's fury. A familiar, unwelcome guilt gnawed at him. Lower on the slope, Alara Metasweet squeezed Finn's hand tighter. Little Willow, fragile as a winter bird, stumbled beside her, face tucked deep into Alara's threadbare cloak. The gale savaged them, plucking at their breath and peppering their skin with icy shot. The snow formed an impenetrable wall, morphing familiar trails into treacherous snares. "Mama, I can't see," Willow whimpered, her plea lost within the storm's cacophony. Alara crouched, gathering Willow into her embrace. The added burden made progress even more grueling, her muscles protesting fiercely. Yet, she couldn't abandon her child to confront the storm alone. "Just a bit further, my love," she encouraged, her voice taut but resolute. "Remember the tale of the spunky little robin that braved the worst gale?" Finn, ever grounded, tugged at her sleeve. "Mama, tales won't warm us." He spoke the truth. Stories offered solace, not survival. But Alara clung to them, to the spark of hope they ignited against the overwhelming bleakness. They struggled on, battling the wind and the accumulating snow, their bodies aching, their spirits flagging. Alara's gaze darted through the whirling white, desperately seeking any hint of refuge. A shallow cave, a toppled giant of a tree. Anything to provide a reprieve from the storm's relentless onslaught. Back at the cabin, a particularly savage gust hammered the north-facing wall. The structure shuddered, followed by a low groan of strained wood. Silas cursed under his breath. He'd fortified the cabin as well as possible, yet no haven was impervious to nature's unbridled power. He seized his axe, its weight a comfort in his grip, and ventured outside to gauge the damage. The gale nearly yanked the axe free. He peered through the blinding snow, his vision limited to mere feet. The air vibrated with snow, the temperature plummeting sharply. He needed to retreat inside before hypothermia set in. As he pivoted, he detected something, or thought he did, a fleeting movement within the whirling white. A visual trick? A phantom conjured by his mind? He strained his sight, scanning the storm. "Hello," he yelled, his voice swallowed whole by the wind. "Is anyone out there?" Only the wind responded, a derisive shriek that sent goose flesh rippling down his spine. He reasoned it was nothing, merely the storm playing with his senses. Yet, a persistent unease lingered, a feeling that he was not alone in the maelstrom. Alara stumbled, her boots snagging on a hidden root beneath the snowdrift. She fell heavily, landing hard, Willow still cradled in her arms. The impact stole her breath, and for a moment, she remained there, dazed and defeated. "Mama!" Finn cried, his voice edged with panic. He attempted to pull her up, but his small hands were no match for her dead weight. Alara levered herself up, wincing at the sharp pain radiating from her ankle. It felt twisted, perhaps sprained. She couldn't bear weight on it. Despair threatened to drown her. They were stranded, injured, at the complete mercy of the storm's wrath. "We must keep moving," she said, her voice wavering. "We must locate shelter." Yet, even as she uttered the words, she knew their chances were fading. The storm was prevailing. Silas, back inside the cabin, couldn't dismiss the sensation that he'd glimpsed something. He approached the window, staring out into the swirling white chaos. The wind screamed, the snow battered against the glass, obscuring everything. He perceived nothing except the storm's implacable fury. Still, something had shifted. The solitude, previously menacing, had now become stifling, heavy with a sense of imminent dread. He felt a prickling at the nape of his neck, a primal instinct alerting him to danger. He grabbed his rifle, chambered around, and stood vigil by the door, his senses heightened. He didn't know what awaited him, yet he knew, with a bone-deep certainty, that something was approaching. The storm was not mere weather. It was an omen, shelter from the cold. The gale shrieked, battering at the cabin like a vengeful spirit. Silas tightened his grip on the rifle, the chilled steel a meager reassurance against the tempest's wrath. He strained to see through the iced-over window, finding only a vortex of white. The premonition that had gnawed at him all day intensified, a crushing weight akin to the snow accumulating above. Solitude, usually a balm, felt tonight like a sentence. Then came the assault on the door. Not a gentle knock, but a desperate, frenzied thud that resonated through the small dwelling, eclipsing the storm's clamor. Silas stilled. Visitors were unheard of, especially in such a ferocious blizzard. He eased the rifle down, his pulse quickening. Was it merely the wind playing tricks? An illusion conjured by isolation and dread? The battering resumed, more urgent this time, punctuated by a muffled plea. It wasn't the wind. Someone was out there, in dire need. He moved stealthily, boots sinking into the thick rug, and peered through the peephole. The distorted image resolved into focus. A woman, her face drained and weary, pressed against the wood. Two small figures huddled at her legs, nearly swallowed by the swirling snow. His initial impulse was to ignore it, to retreat into the comforting embrace of his self-imposed exile. Ecrav no entanglements, no verdens, no intrusions. Years have been dedicated to erecting these walls of solitude, as unyielding as the cabin's timbers. But then he witnessed the woman falter, her hand clutching her side, and a child's fragile whimper cut through the din. He hesitated, his fingers hovering over the bolt. The wind keened once more, a lament that mocked his reluctance. Memories surfaced of his deceased mother, her comforting presence on frigid winter nights. With a sigh that seemed to exhale all the loneliness of past years, he released the lock. He pulled the door ajar, the wind instantly seizing the opening, flinging snow into the cabin's interior. The woman staggered, her eyes reflecting a mixture of hope and desperation. "Please," she rasped, her voice raw. "Shelter, we're lost. And wounded." She gestured weakly at her flank, where a dark bloom stained her coat. Two children peeked from behind her, their faces wan and streaked with tears. The younger, a girl, clutched a threadbare rabbit. The boy, a few years older, gazed up at Silas with wide, inquisitive eyes. Silas's gaze flicked between them. The woman was clearly at the limit of her endurance. The children trembled, their garments plastered to their small frames. Turning them away was unthinkable. "Please," the woman repeated, her voice barely audible. "Only until it passes. Will be no bother." A surge of resentment coiled within Silas. Trouble was precisely what they represented. His carefully maintained peace disrupted, his solitude violated. Yet, the sight of the children, their features stamped with fear and cold, eclipsed his selfish considerations. He swung the door wider. "Get inside," he directed gruffly, retreating to allow them entrance. "Quickly, before we're all encased in ice." The woman shepherded the children inside, their small feet crunching on the snow already coating the floor. As she crossed the threshold, she flinched, clutching her side once again. Her complexion was ghostly. Silas slammed the door against the onslaught, the sound booming in the sudden, relative quiet of the cabin. He observed the woman and children draw together, their eyes sweeping the small space, taking in the rough-hewn walls, the Spartan furnishings, the looming form of the man who had reluctantly granted them refuge. The little boy, detaching from his mother's side, took a tentative step towards Silas, his gaze riveted on the rifle still held in the woodsman's hand. "What's that?" he asked, his voice imbued with a naive curiosity that seemed jarringly out of place amidst the storm's fury. Silas lowered the rifle, a flicker of something resembling surprise flitting across his features. He hadn't anticipated a question, least of all from the boy. He was accustomed to quiet, to the unspoken language of the forest. This was different. He looked at the boy, truly saw him, and recognized not a threat, nor an intrusion, but a small, vulnerable child seeking answers. He sighed once more, the weight of the storm and the unexpected arrival of these strangers settling heavily upon him. His tranquil existence was irrevocably altered. "It's for defense," he replied, his voice raspy, unaccustomed to addressing children. "Against the wolves." The boy's eyes widened. "Wolves?" Silas nodded. "They grow ravenous in winter." The boy glanced out the window at the swirling snow, his expression a blend of trepidation and fascination. Then he swiveled back to Silas, his eyes holding a question that went beyond mere childish curiosity. A question that Silas, for the first time in what felt like an eternity, felt compelled to address. Laughter in the cabin. The gale hammered the cabin walls, a counterpoint to the burgeoning exuberance within. Finn, a pint-sized adventurer decked in woolens, stood mesmerized before the mounted rack above the hearth. "Did you slay him, mister?" he breathed, his expression a blend of wonder and apprehension. Silas, jolted from his reverie, only grunted. "Found him like that. Took what I needed." Willow, more demure, lingered behind her brother, her attention captured by a bookshelf laden with time-worn volumes. Her fingers, hesitant, traced the embossed lettering of a leather-bound tome. "Can you read?" she murmured, her question swallowed by the wind's howl. "A little," Silas conceded, a peculiar unease stirring under their innocent scrutiny. He hadn't felt so, inspected in ages. He was accustomed to the taciturn company of the woods, not inquisitive youngsters. Alara, meanwhile, had discovered a mending basket beside the fire. Her fingers, surprisingly deft despite her weariness, threaded a needle with practiced ease. "We are grateful, Silas," she stated quietly, yet with resolve. "For everything." She nodded towards his torn sleeve. "Allow me." Silas, used to self-reliance, merely nodded, observing her ministrations with mingled distrust and fascination. Her presence was a disturbance, an alien element within his meticulously maintained solitude, yet her inherent grace was undeniable. The cabin, ordinarily cloaked in shadows, felt brighter, infused with warmth. Finn, having exhausted the fascination of the antlers, unearthed a collection of polished stones in a wooden bowl. He began arranging them on the floor, proclaiming them maps to buried fortunes. Willow, her interest in the books waning, settled onto a stool near Alara, observing the sewing with rapt attention. As twilight descended, Alara announced supper. Silas watched her navigate the cramped kitchen, her movements efficient and purposeful. She unearthed a burlap sack of potatoes and a cured sausage, soon permeating the cabin with the mouth-watering fragrance of a slowly simmering stew. It was an aroma he hadn't realized he craved, a scent of home and belonging that had been absent for too long. "May I assist?" Willow inquired, her timidity momentarily eclipsed by the prospect of cooking. Alara smiled. "You can peel the carrots, darling." Soon, Willow was diligently scraping the vegetables with a small knife, her brow furrowed in concentration. Finn, not wanting to be left out, volunteered to set the table, carefully arranging the mismatched crockery and silverware. Silas found himself relegated to the periphery, an onlooker within his own domain. He observed the family dynamic, a strange interplay of affection and frustration, fondness and gentle correction. He noticed the way Finn sought Alara's approval with his bright, questioning eyes, and the tenderness that filled Alara's gaze whenever she looked upon her children. It was a realm of connection and codependence he had never experienced. Later, as they huddled around a rough table, sharing the simple fare, Silas became aware of a subtle shift within himself. He found himself conversing, answering Finn's incessant inquiries about the forest and its inhabitants. He even managed a faint smile when Willow bashfully offered him more potatoes. After the meal, Ilera insisted on clearing the dishes. As she busied herself, Silas retreated to his customary spot near the hearth, watching the flames flicker and dance. But this night, his thoughts were not solitary. The sound of children's mirth echoed through the cabin, banishing the gloom that had long resided there. Finn regaled Willow with an outlandish tale of a talking squirrel, his voice animated with mischief. Willow, usually so composed, erupted in uncontrollable giggles. The sound was jarring, unfamiliar, yet not unwelcome. It was a symphony of life, of joy, of togetherness. It was a cadence that had been absent from Silas's existence for far too long. He leaned back, closing his eyes, allowing the sound to envelop him. As the children eventually succumbed to sleep, nestled in blankets near the fire, Ilera joined Silas by the hearth. "They haven't laughed like that in ages," she murmured, her voice thick with appreciation. "Thank you, Silas. You've given us a priceless gift." Silas, discomfited by praise, merely shrugged, merely doing what anyone would. Yet, he knew it wasn't entirely honest. He could have abandoned them to the storm. He could have ignored their plight. But something, a dormant ember of humanity, had compelled him to open his door. And now, gazing at the slumbering children, their faces serene, he wondered whether he had given them a gift, or if they, in their innocent need, had gifted him something far more profound, sharing stories and skills. The blizzard raged with undiminished fury. The wind, a demented vocalist, shrieked against the cabin, its icy fingers probing every crack. Even Silas felt a primal chill snake up his spine. Inside, a different current buzzed. Finn, a coiled spring, bombarded Silas with questions about the untamed world surrounding them. "Have you ever tangled with a Bruin, Mr. Blackwood? A real, honest-to-goodness bear? Are they wicked scary?" Initially stunned by the verbal onslaught, Silas found himself disarmed by the boy's boundless zeal. "Bears are kin to these woods, Finn. Show respect, and you'll earn it in return." And yes, he conceded, a faint smile gracing his lips, they possess a certain gravitas. He decided to harness the boy's energy. "How about an axe lesson? We could split some logs." Finn's eyes grew wide with possibility. "Really? I get to—" Swaddled in oversized, hand-me-down clothes, Finn trailed Silas into the biting wind. The stinging snow couldn't dampen his spirits. Silas demonstrated the proper footing, how to secure the axe, and the vital importance of a swift, clean strike. Though diminutive, Finn possessed surprising strength. His first swings were awkward, the axe landing with dull thuds on the unyielding wood. But with Silas's steady coaching, he gradually found his groove. Back in the warmth of the cabin, Willow, a silent sentinel, settled beside Ilera, assisting with the laundry. Her tiny hands meticulously smoothed the wrinkles from a threadbare blanket. She was a girl of few words, but her proximity radiated a quiet comfort. Once finished, Willow retreated to a secluded nook with a piece of charred wood and scraps of paper unearthed by Silas. Her brow furrowed in intense focus, she began to draw. Her inner world took shape on paper. The tempestuous snowfall, mythical creatures with luminous eyes, and the hearth of the cabin, a beacon of warmth and security. As twilight descended, the storm's ferocity showed no signs of abating. Silas replenished the fire, the leaping flames painting the walls with spectral shadows. Ilera, propped against a pile of cushions, watched him, her expression contemplative. "Thank you, Silas," she murmured, "for everything you've done." He shrugged, discomfort by the gratitude. "It's just shelter from a storm." "It's so much more," Ilera gently corrected. "You've given us sanctuary, a refuge to recover. And you are teaching Finn things only you can." A hush settled between them, broken only by the fire's snaps and pops and the wind's mournful cry. Alara broke the quiet. "Tell me your story, Silas," she urged, her voice soft and inviting. "Tell me about this place. What makes it home?" Silas hesitated, the prospect of revisiting his past akin to reopening a long-healed wound. But the sincerity shining in Alara's eyes moved him. He began with his boyhood, growing up in the mountain's embrace, his father, a man of few words but profound wisdom, imparting his knowledge of the woods. He spoke of Sarah, his wife, her laughter like the melodies of birds, her passion for the wildflowers dotting the meadow. His voice caught as he recounted the tragedy that had snatched her away, leaving him lost at sea. Alara listened with unwavering attention, her eyes mirroring his sorrow. When he fell silent, she reached out, her fingers gently brushing his hand. "I'm so deeply sorry, Silas," she whispered, "for your profound loss." He looked at her, taken aback by her genuine empathy. "And what of you, Alara?" he countered. "What brought you to seek refuge in these wilds, in the heart of winter?" Alara sighed, a shadow of pain flitting across her features. "I'm running," she confessed, her voice nearly lost in the wind's lament. "Fleeing a life I could no longer endure. A life of confinement, of suffocation." She offered no further explanation, but Silas sensed the profound depth of her distress, the desperation propelling her into the unforgiving wilderness. "We were bound for a small town a few days' journey north of here," she continued, a newfound resolution in her voice. "I have a cousin there. I hope she can help me find my footing." The fire crackled, the sole sound in the cabin for a drawn-out moment. "You are welcome here, Alara," Silas stated, his voice gravelly but heartfelt. "For as long as you require." The words felt foreign on his tongue, unfamiliar yet strangely comforting. He realized, with a jolt of surprise, that he spoke the truth. The weight of debt. The thaw was hesitant, a promise whispered on the wind rather than shouted from the mountaintops. Silas chopped wood with a practiced rhythm, the bite of the axe a familiar comfort. The scent of pine needles thawing beneath the snow rose to meet him, a bittersweet fragrance that tugged at memories he usually kept buried deep. He missed the solitude, the quiet communion with the forest, but the silence now felt heavier, laced with a loneliness he hadn't acknowledged before Alara and her children arrived. A shout broke through the stillness. Silas straightened, squinting through the trees. A lone figure, bundled in furs, urged a laden mule towards the cabin. He recognized the gait instantly. Jebediah, a traveling merchant who occasionally braved the wilderness, peddling supplies and news from the outlying villages. Silas wiped his brow with a gloved hand and met Jebediah halfway. "Jebediah, didn't expect to see you this far out, especially not after that blizzard." Jebediah, his face ruddy and wind-chapped, dismounted stiffly. "Blackwood, word travels slow, but travels. Heard you had company." He nodded towards the cabin, a knowing glint in his eye. "Stopped by to see if they needed anything. And, well, I have a message." Zedas gut clenched. He didn't like the sound of that. Message for whom? For the widow Metasweet. Jebediah shifted his weight, avoiding Silas's gaze. From Oakhaven. Silas led Jebediah back to the cabin. Finn and Willow were outside, building a snow fort with haphazard enthusiasm. Alara emerged from the doorway, her expression wary as she took in the scene. "Alara," Silas said, his voice low, "this is Jebediah, a merchant from Oakhaven. He says he has a message for you." Alara's face paled. She moved towards Jebediah as if pulled by an invisible string, her eyes dark with apprehension. "A message? From Oakhaven? What is it?" Jebediah cleared his throat, the sound echoing in the sudden quiet. "It's about your late husband, ma'am. About debts." He fumbled in his satchel and produced a folded parchment sealed with wax. "These are outstanding debts, incurred before his passing. The parties involved are seeking repayment." Alara took the parchment, her fingers trembling. She broke the seal with a jerky movement and scanned the contents, her breath catching in her throat. Silas watched her, his heart aching with a premonition of disaster. Finn and Willow, sensing the shift in the atmosphere, abandoned their fort and huddled close to their mother, their faces mirroring her distress. "What? What is it, Mama?" Finn asked, his voice small. Alara didn't answer. She stared at the parchment, her eyes wide with a mixture of disbelief and despair. "They want everything," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "The house, the land, everything Thomas worked for. Debts." Silas stepped forward, his voice hardening. "What kind of debts?" Jebediah shuffled his feet. "Business debts, mostly. Some gambling debts. It's all there in the document." He gestured towards the parchment in Alara's hand. "I'm just the messenger, ma'am. I am sorry." Alara crumpled the parchment in her fist, her knuckles white. But I have nothing. I can't pay this. Where will we go?" Finn, his eyes wide with fear, clung to his mother's leg. Willow, her face pale and drawn, began to cry silently, tears streaming down her cheeks. Silas watched the scene unfold, a cold fury rising within him. He had seen enough hardship in his life to recognize the predatory gleam in Jebediah's eyes, the satisfaction of delivering bad news. He saw the crushing weight of despair settling on Alara's shoulders, the fear in her children's eyes. "How long do we have?" Silas asked, his voice dangerously calm. Jebediah hesitated, his gaze flickering between Silas and Alara. "They're being lenient, considering the circumstances. They're giving her until the spring thaw to settle the debts." Spring thaw, barely 3 months. An impossible deadline. Alara closed her eyes, swaying slightly. Silas reached out and steadied her, his hand firm on her arm. "Come inside," he said, his voice gentle but firm. "Let's talk about this." He guided her and the children back into the cabin, leaving Jebediah standing alone in the snow, the mule shifting restlessly beside him. As he closed the door, Silas glanced back at the merchant, a silent promise in his eyes. This wasn't over, not by a long shot. A generous offer. The silence after Jebediah's departure hung heavy in the cabin, thicker than the falling snow. Alara stared into the fire, the dancing flames reflecting the turmoil in her eyes. Willow and Finn, sensing the shift in the air, clung to her skirts, their usual boisterous energy subdued. Silas watched her, his heart aching. He knew that look, that desperate clench in the jaw. It was the look of a cornered animal, and it mirrored a look he'd seen too often in his own reflection. He rose from his chair, his movements slow and deliberate. "Alara," he began, his voice rough and used to offering comfort. There's something I want to say." She looked up, her gaze wary. "Silas, I don't know what we're going to do." He walked to the far corner of the cabin, to the small, iron-bound chest he kept hidden beneath a loose floorboard. It was a habit left over from his days as a trapper, when he'd buried his earnings against theft. He knelt, the floorboards creaking beneath his weight, and lifted the chest. Carrying it back to the hearth, he placed it at Alara's feet. The iron was cold against the warmth of the fire. He opened it, the hinges protesting with a rusty groan. Inside, nestled amongst faded letters and a tarnished silver locket, were stacks of bills. Not a fortune, by any means, but a considerable sum accumulated over years of solitary living. "This," he said, gesturing to the contents, "is all I have. It's yours. Take it. Pay off the debt." Alara stared at the money, her eyes widening in disbelief. "Silas, I can't." "You can, and you will," he insisted, his voice firm. "It's not much, but it's enough to make a start, to give you a chance. But this is your life's savings. You've worked so hard for this." She shook her head vehemently. "I won't take it. We can't." "What am I saving it for, Alara?" he asked, his voice softening. "To buy more solitude? To watch the years slip by with no one to share them with? This money means nothing to me if it just sits here gathering dust. But it could mean everything to you and your children." He reached out and gently took her hand, his calloused fingers closing around hers. Her skin was soft, almost fragile, in contrast to his own rough exterior. "Please, Alara, let me help you build a new life. a life free from the shadow of your husband's debts. She pulled her hand away, her expression a mixture of gratitude and stubborn resolve. I appreciate the offer, Silas, more than you know, but I can't accept it. We'll figure something out. I'll find work. We'll manage. Manage? Silas scoffed, a bitter edge creeping into his voice. You're injured. Winter is here. What kind of work do you think you'll find that will pay off a debt like that by spring? I don't know, she admitted, her voice barely a whisper. But I won't take charity, especially not from you. This isn't charity, Ilera, Silas said, his voice pleading. It's an investment in your future, in Willow and Finn's future. He knelt before her, his gaze level with hers. I know what it's like to lose everything, to be left with nothing but the echoes of the past. I lost my wife, Sarah, to sickness years ago. The grief near swallowed me whole. I pushed everyone away, convinced myself I was better off alone. He paused, the memory of Sarah a sharp ache in his chest. But I wasn't. I was just existing. Until you arrived. You and your children. You've brought life back into this cabin. You've given me a reason to wake up in the morning. He reached out again, this time cupping her face in his hands. Don't deny me this, Ilera. Don't deny yourself and your children a chance at happiness. Let me help you. Please. Toys and treasures. The silence that followed Silas's offer hung heavy, thicker than the snow still clinging to the eaves. Ilera's refusal, though delivered gently, resonated with a finality that threatened to undo the fragile bridge they had built. Silas watched her, the flicker of a renewed loneliness dancing in his eyes. He retreated into himself, nodding slowly, accepting her decision with an outward calm that belied the churning disappointment within. The next morning dawned crisp and cold. Silas busied himself in his workshop, the familiar scent of pine and cedar a small comfort. He found himself drawn to the half-finished rocking horse he'd started years ago, a forgotten whim. He picked up his carving tools, the polished steel cool against his calloused fingers. He'd intended it for a child he never had. Now perhaps. He glanced towards the cabin, imagining Willow's face lighting up at the sight of it. With renewed purpose, he set to work. The rhythmic tap of his mallet against the chisel filled the air, a steady beat against the lingering silence. Later, Ilera found him there, surrounded by wood shavings. Finn was perched on a stool, eyes wide with fascination as Silas carefully shaped a small wooden bird. Willow stood shyly behind her mother, clutching a pine cone. Silas, Ilera began tentatively, I've been thinking. He paused, his gaze meeting hers. I can't take your savings, she continued, her voice firm but laced with emotion. But perhaps there's another way. She gestured to the rocking horse, now nearing completion. You're incredibly talented, Silas. These are treasures. Finn piped up. Can you make me a sword, Mr. Blackwood? A really sharp one. Silas chuckled, a genuine sound that warmed the small space. Maybe a dull one for you, young man. Safety first. He looked back at Ilera, a spark of hope rekindled in his eyes. What did you have in mind? Ilera explained her idea. The village market, held every other Saturday, was a hub for local artisans and farmers. They could sell his creations, splitting the profits fairly. It wouldn't be easy, but it would be honest, and it would preserve her dignity. Silas considered the proposition. It was a far cry from the solitary existence he was accustomed to, but the thought of working alongside Ilera and the children, of sharing his craft with the world, was unexpectedly appealing. He nodded slowly. I reckon we could give it a try. The following days were a flurry of activity. Silas, invigorated by the prospect of sharing his skills, worked tirelessly. He crafted wooden toys, spinning tops, intricately carved animals, and miniature wagons. He fashioned sturdy stools and small tables, each piece imbued with the care and precision of a master craftsman. Ilera and the children were eager participants. Willow, with her delicate touch, helped sand the edges of the toys, her small fingers moving with surprising dexterity. Finn, after receiving his promised dull wooden sword, became Silas's enthusiastic apprentice, fetching tools and attempting to mimic his movements, much to everyone's amusement. Ilera, with her keen eye for detail, stained and varnished the finished pieces, bringing out the natural beauty of the wood. The cabin, once a place of quiet solitude, now buzzed with life and laughter. The air was filled with the scent of sawdust and varnish, the sounds of hammering and sawing, and the cheerful chatter of a family working together. Silas found himself smiling more often, the weight of his past grief gradually lifting. Market day arrived, bright and breezy. They loaded the wagon with their wares, the colorful toys and sturdy furniture, creating a vibrant display. As they journeyed towards the village, Silas felt a knot of apprehension in his stomach. He hadn't interacted with so many people in years. But as they set up their stall, his fears began to dissipate. Alara, with her warm smile and engaging personality, drew in potential customers. Finn, brandishing his wooden sword, entertained the children, while Willow shyly offered them small wooden animals as gifts. Silas watched, a sense of pride swelling in his chest. His creations, born from a lonely heart, were bringing joy to others. The toys sold quickly, the children captivated by their simple charm. The furniture also found eager buyers, impressed by its quality and craftsmanship. By the end of the day, their wagon was nearly empty, and their pockets were full. As they made their way back to the cabin, the setting sun painting the sky in hues of orange and purple, Silas felt a profound sense of contentment. They had earned enough to keep them going for a while. More importantly, they had discovered a shared purpose, a bond forged in wood and laughter. The loneliness that had haunted him for so long seemed to have finally receded, replaced by the comforting warmth of family. A new home, a new family. The market's success still buzzed in Silas's mind as he hauled 2 laden baskets towards the cabin. Alara and the children a joyous parade behind him, their merriment rippling through the woods. The coins chimed softly in his pocket, a promise whispered of winter's comfort and a full table. Yet, the weight of the coins paled in comparison to the unexpected lightness blossoming in Silas's chest. He turned to see Finn mimicking his burdened stride with comical exaggeration, and Willow absorbed in the intricate architecture of a fallen leaf. They were his kin now, a bond he'd long since deemed impossible. Dawn painted the sky when an unexpected guest arrived. A well-appointed carriage, drawn by a matched pair of chestnut steeds, rolled to a stop before the cabin. From it emerged a man, tall and powerfully built, with a neatly sculpted beard and eyes the color of glacial ice. Silas recognized him immediately. Mr. Abernathy, lord of the sprawling Abernathy estate bordering the woods. Mr. Blackwood, Abernathy greeted, offering a gloved hand. His tone was surprisingly mild for a man of such bearing. Word has reached me of impressive work with wood. Silas, cautious yet curious, clasped his hand. Just a bit of hobby work, sir. Abernathy chuckled, a low rumble in his chest. Håller med dapning, iwedu. My stable master raves about the shed roof you repaired, work surpassing that of seasoned professionals. I require a man of your multifaceted talents, Mr. Blackwood. The estate demands constant attention, and I weary of unreliable hands. I'm offering you a permanent post, maintenance foreman, with a generous salary and lodgings. He paused, his gaze softening as it fell upon Alara and the children peering from behind the cabin. A cottage on the grounds, suitable for a family. Silasas dojehasht spawn. A secure position? A real home? Security for Alara and the young ones? He sought Alara's eyes, brimming with a hesitant mixture of hope and disbelief. He saw her unspoken question. Could they possibly embrace such a chance? He met Abernathy's gaze, finding genuine warmth in those blue depths. Mr. Abernathy, Silas replied, his voice thick with emotion, I accept your offer. Their relocation was swift and surprisingly effortless. Abernathy dispatched his staff to transport their meager possessions to the cottage. Though small, it possessed an undeniable charm. Whitewashed walls, a thatched roof, and a wild tangle of wildflowers in the garden. The Abernathy estate buzzed with industry, yet their little haven felt like a world unto itself, a place of refuge. Finn promptly declared the attic room his crow's nest, while Willow, equally delighted, busied herself transplanting blossoms, her small hands carefully firming the soil. Alara, her face alight with joy, began unpacking their few belongings, breathing life into the space. Silas watched them, a wave of emotion washing over him. He had lived in solitude for so long, convinced of his solitary destiny. Now, enveloped in their laughter and the comforting cadence of their days, he understood how profoundly wrong he had been. That evening, after a simple meal of stew and bread, Silas settled on the porch swing, watching fireflies ignite the twilight. Alara joined him, drawing a shawl around her. "Thank you, Silas," she murmured, her voice a soft breath, "for everything you've done." He reached out, his weathered fingers gently enclosing hers. "We're family now, Alara. We look after each other." He gazed at the cottage, a honeyed glow spilling from the windows. He could hear Finn and Willow's cheerful whispers from upstairs, a sweet harmony in the still air. He was no longer a lone woodsman chained to his past. He was a father, a guardian, a piece of something larger than himself. He was home, and for the first time in years, a genuine contentment settled over Silas Blackwood. The ache of his loneliness, once a constant shadow, had dissipated, replaced by a sense of belonging he had ceased to believe possible. This humble cottage, this newfound family, was an unexpected bounty, a dream realized.